on the University Center and other student fee facilities. Sorry, I think I said that incorrectly. Our facilitator today is Marilyn Dukes, the Director of Student Engagement and Business Services. I briefly mentioned, my name is Alina Mojarro, and I am the Community Education Outreach Coordinator for Associated Students. In our audience today, we have executive officers, senators, and student leaderships from the boards, the committees, commissions, and units. Today, I'm encouraging everybody to please make the most of the learning opportunity and participate as much as you are able to. While engaging in this topic, please do so with respect and sensitivity for one another and for the topic at hand. Please take care of yourselves during the session, and please take a break if you need. If you have any questions today, please utilize and use the raise hand function to indicate that you have a question. And you're also welcome to put your questions in the chat. Also, please know that this session is being recorded and will be posted online. We don't want the recording to be a barrier for you in participating today. So if you have a concern about being recorded, please send us an email after the session so we can address your concerns. Also, please note that there will be a checkout form at the end of the chat, at the end of the session, and I'll post that in the chat. So please do not leave today without signing into that link. In order to be credited for this session, you'll need to complete that form. So again, thank you for joining us. And I'm going to pass it along to Marilyn. And Marilyn, you should be able to have all functions to share your screen, and please let me know if I can be helpful.
Okay, thank you, Alina. So good morning, still morning. Thank you all for coming. I want to apologize in advance for my dogs barking. I did not think about the Labor Day holiday, and this ends up being the garbage pickup day for my neighborhood. And like many dogs, they do not like the garbage truck. So, and to complicate that, my street is a through street. So a lot of times the garbage trucks will use it to go through to their next pickup area. So there will be a lot of, I believe there probably will be barking during the session. So I apologize for that. Is everybody doing okay today? Yes? You had a long morning? I'm going to try to share my screen. I don't think I can. It says only host right now.
I am going to make you a host then.
Okay. So let me try again. Can I share my screen? Desktop? This, right? Share. Let me see if this is going to work. Yes, and then we'll view it.
There you go. We do see your presentation.
You're seeing the presentation?
Yes.
Anything else on the screen or just the presentation?
It's now in presentation mode.
Okay, awesome. So this is going to be a pretty short discussion on campus buildings. It's not an hour-long presentation. I did something similar last year for senators. So we'll kind of just go through and talk about campus buildings and particularly how they're funded. But I thought I'd go back a little bit and talk about the beginning of UC Santa Barbara. And some of you might be more familiar with the history of the school, but just so that we're all kind of have that base history. UC Santa Barbara actually began as the Anna Blake School in 1889, and it offered training in home economics and industrial arts. So that was really where we trace our very, very beginnings of this campus. And then in 1909, it became the Santa Barbara State Normal School of the Manual Arts and Home Economics. And normal schools were teacher education schools in the United States and in other places in Europe. In California, there was a series of normal schools that were developed in the 1850s, 1860s, I believe. And Santa Barbara had the Santa Barbara State Normal School of Manual Arts and Home Economics. In 1919, the name was shortened to Santa Barbara State Normal School. Actually, as a side note, UCLA also began as a normal school just for historical purposes. In 1921, it was renamed the Santa Barbara State Teachers College, and then it began to focus more on the liberal arts four-year degrees. It was located on the Riviera campus in Santa Barbara. Some of you may have heard people refer to the Riviera campus. It was where UCSB was located before it moved to its current location here in Goleta. In 1935, the name changed again to Santa Barbara State College. And in 1944, it entered into the UC system. And initially, we were called the Santa Barbara College of the University of California. It was pretty controversial at the time to bring our campus into the UC system. There was a lot of pushback from UCLA, and it was a little bit considered kind of an annex campus or auxiliary campus to UCLA. But the professors at UCLA really thought that Santa Barbara was a lesser campus than their campus and didn't have the same resources, and it wasn't research oriented at that time. So there was a lot of pushback. And if you ever have the inclination or time to go into some of the archives, there's letters that were written that are kind of funny now to look back on about how outraged they were that Santa Barbara might be considered a UC because it wasn't research based. And in 1954, the college relocated from the Riviera to Goleta and on the side of a former World War II Marine Air Station base. So the airport was built by the city in 1941, but during World War II, it became part of this Marine Air Station base, and there was training that happened at the airport for the Marine Air operations. But then in 1954, we received this land from the federal government and started to build out UCSB. And in 1958, it became the University of California, Santa Barbara, and we were the third campus officially designated a University of California. And at that time, the chief campus officer title changed, which was a provost, and it became a chancellor. Our first chancellor was Samuel Gould. He was only chancellor till I think 62-ish, at which time it became Vernon Cheadle. And the first chancellor here at the University of California wasn't from the academic side. And in the city, there were people in the city who were supporting the campus that really wanted UCSB to be a research institution. And so there was a push to have somebody that was more academically oriented to be the chancellor. And during the time that Vernon Cheadle was here, he really did transform it into that research campus that we grew and became. I thought you might be interested in seeing this picture. This is the Marine base that was located here before the campus was. We still have some of these old buildings on campus that were here. We're part of the Marine Station. You might have seen them as you walked around. They're a little bit hidden now, and they've been demolished over time, and other buildings have been built there, but you can still see some of them hidden. But some of them, like, I don't know if people know what this building is, but this is still here, and I'll talk about that later. But this whole area where Ivy was, all of this, it's all grown up now. It was just vacant land back then that we got. And then this is where the campus started to actually build a little bit more, and you can see the residence halls being built there. And then now, do you recognize what this building is? It's a College of Creative Studies. Yeah, so it was one of the oldest buildings on campus. And then, like I said, you can see these residence halls over. You might not be able to see it depending upon where you have your things on your screen, but this is a parking lot over to the far right. Now it's the Bren School and the Marine Sciences School. But when I came here 31 years ago now, that was still a parking lot that we parked on. So then this would be USEN Road going down. It's changed a lot, hasn't it? It's interesting to look at the old photos though. It's fun, I think, to kind of look at them and try to figure out where things were and what's there now. I think I can go, whoops, I can't move there we go. Oh shoot. So do you recognize this building? Does anybody recognize it? It was also on our original map, but you might recognize this section of it. Has anybody been to the AS Annex, AS Media Center? That's right here, behind Stork Tower. Yeah, so that, again, one of the original buildings. This ended up being an original university center way back when. There was food offered in this building, but now this is part of the AS Media Center, AS Annex. And then the original USEN, a drawing, a rendering of that, which was built in 1966. And this building ended right at the end of those hallways. Now, the hub was not in, at the time when I came, it was called the pub. It wasn't part of the original USEN, that was USEN 2. It was an addition that was built onto the University Center. This part in 1966 was the bookstore. There were eating facilities in here and some meeting rooms, and AS was on the third floor up here, you know, where the food bank is now. And up on the third floor was Associated Students, and was also what then was called the Campus Activity Center, but which now would be Office of Student Life. We all shared the third floor. When I came in '89, program board was located in the area that the food bank now uses as storage, back in the corner over there. And the AS executive officers were located where that study area is up there and where the food bank lounge is. And that was all AS admin as well, was on that one side. It was all crammed into there. So those were the AS offices, and Campus Activity Center was located where community housing is right now. So it's kind of fun to look back at the old pictures. Stork Tower was built in 1969. At the time, it was the largest cement structure in Santa Barbara County. I think it might still be the largest one. It's cement and steel. And you can see that Stork Plaza being built and Stork Tower. So you've probably heard stories of all of the unrest during the Vietnam War, and now to think back that it was just a brand new plaza that people were gathering in when some of those protests were happening. It was just recently built, and it was built as a free speech plaza. And it was built, obviously named after Thomas Stork, who was the publisher of the Santa Barbara News Press. And it was designed for free speech area, and to house the newspaper offices and the radio station. It's kind of cool picture. And then just a little bit more about buildings. So as buildings were added to the campus, they were funded in a variety of ways. Some were state funded. So those are largely academic buildings or academically related buildings, classroom buildings. There were donor funded buildings where wealthy supporters of the university came forward to donate funding for buildings like Stork Tower. And then there were student fee funded. So student pass taxes, which you all usually call lock-ins, that paid for the construction of a building, or a combination of funding sources. Operation and maintenance of the buildings, generally buildings funded by the state are operated and maintained by the state. And so their budgets are dependent upon how the state is doing financially. Buildings that are funded through a variety of funding sources are allocated state resources in proportion to the academic use of the facility. And non-state funded buildings may receive state support if they support the academic mission. So for example, the Event Center or the Thunderdome receives funding in an amount proportional to the physical activities classes that are held in the center, but otherwise they don't receive ongoing state money for maintenance and operation of the building. So what is developed over time then is also student fee operational and maintenance support. So some student fee buildings included operational support when they were funded. The Student Resource Center, Student Resource Building is one of those that included operational support when they were funded. So the ballot initiatives used to fund those buildings included an ongoing fee that would support operation and maintenance needs of the building. So buildings that didn't include that, often buildings would include expiration dates for their funding, like the University Center. So the students funded a certain amount and it expired on a date. And then the building was paid for and the students didn't pay anymore. But that meant that there was also no ongoing funding for things like operation and maintenance and renovation of those buildings. So buildings and structures that didn't include operational and maintenance funding, they may not have had ongoing funding for maintenance or operations. Buildings built through donor funds usually did not also include operation or maintenance funding. Usually there was no endowment set up by those donors to manage ongoing operational or maintenance needs. They just built the building. Sometimes people refer to those unfunded buildings as orphan buildings because there's no department or funding source that's responsible for their maintenance. And Stork Tower is an example of a structure that does not have maintenance support. So many of you that were on campus last year saw the scaffolding around Stork Tower. So one of the challenges is when there are buildings like Stork Tower, Stork Plaza that need maintenance, there's we have to struggle to find where to pay for that. Who's going to pay for that? Stork Tower is pretty iconic, so the campus will likely come up with the money that's needed to repair Stork Tower. But oftentimes, things like Stork Plaza, when there's been electrical problems, somebody like program board would have to step up and pay for that, because we use Stork Plaza all the time and we need the electrical to work, because there's no other source of maintenance or operational support for those unfunded areas of campus. In the meantime, also, many buildings have received support for maintenance and operations through additional lock-in fees. The Event Center and University Center are both examples of that. They were built through combinations of funding sources, including student fees, donors, and student fee advisory council funding. And they don't receive state support money. And both of these buildings have, over time, received student lock-ins to help support the operation and upkeep of the buildings. Newer buildings from about 2000 on have been required to include operational support in the ballot initiatives. For some of the buildings, like the Event Center, it really has saved the Event Center to have that student lock-in fee support. It used to be, so the Event Center didn't get ongoing operation and maintenance from the state. And when I first came to the campus, the roof was leaking on the Event Center. Event Center was built in 1979, or it came online in 1979. And there was no money to fix the roof of the Event Center. So you would go to basketball games and you might be seated next to or nearby a garbage can that was catching the rain coming through the roof of the building if it was raining. And they struggled and struggled to find a funding source to help pay for repairs to the roof, which we obviously needed. And then eventually we're able to pay for that through the student lock-in. So buildings that are built primarily using student fees, they generally set up either a student governance or a student advisory board. And the boards are charged with the oversight of the student fee money. And the student boards are usually comprised of the building users. For example, the Event Center Governance Board has a faculty representative, staff, a program board representative, a student intercollegiate athlete representative, a student recreation representative, open rec rep, intramurals rep, and a student fee advisory committee rep. And those are the voting members for the Event Center Governance Board. Most other governance or advisory boards are comprised of building users. Sometimes there are also students at large that sit on those boards. Or in the case of the University Center, there's an alumni representative to the University Center Governance Board. So why are there student governance boards? Well, because it's UC policy. And so there's a policy that on required approvals for establishing, increasing, or renewing a compulsory campus-based student fee, which building fees are. And so in this, the fee is, policy is 84, and it's 8410 and 8411. And 8410 directs the chancellors to develop procedures prior to the student referendum that meet some criteria. And the criteria in 8411 is, in the case of compulsory campus-based student fee-funded buildings or other facilities, procedures for continuing student consultation. And on our campus, it's been these governance boards and advisory boards that have been established for that consultation. Larger maintenance concerns for buildings or structures that are not supported by the state, often student fees are not enough to address long-term maintenance or renovation issues. So you may see buildings return for more student fees or renovation projects like the University Center. They haven't come back in a couple of years, but if you've been on campus for a few years, you may recall the University Center coming to try to get a student fee passed to renovate the University Center. Many buildings are aging, or they're built when the campus had a smaller population, or they may have had other funding streams that no longer exist or no longer support the operations. In the case of the University Center, when the latest renovation happened in the mid-90s, the University Center bookstore had very robust sales. They had robust sales in the textbooks area, and they sold a lot of computers. And so they brought in a lot of income revenue for the University Center overall. And of course, things have changed a lot since the mid-90s, and people largely come to campus already owning their computers, and they may get textbooks from a variety of sources now, and not necessarily from the campus bookstore. But back when that fee was being voted on in the early 90s, that wasn't part of the landscape. And I don't know that anybody ever thought that we would be where we are today back in the early 90s. And so the revenue streams to support the University Center are not what they were when the University Center was built. And it creates a long-term problem for some older buildings on campus. The University Center, during the time that we've been shut down, has tried to do some work on some of the pipes that exist in the University Center, but some of the University Center water pipes, sewage pipes, electrical are all original to when it was built in the 60s. And all of those need upgrading and improvements. And it's very difficult to get a fee passed for students to support that because it's all hidden. So the University Center has a couple times, not often, but a few times come to the students trying to get money for renovations to the building, and I've not been able to get those fees to pass. They tend to be kind of high, the fees, and a lot of that money has to go to infrastructure to bring the building back up to more modern times, to replace all this aging infrastructure of the building. And it's very difficult to get those kinds of fees passed. It's not something that you can see and really see the improvement on, but also some of you may have smelled sewer smells around the bathrooms, and that is part of why you may have smelled that, is because of the aging infrastructure in the University Center. So why is all of this important, and why do we talk about it in your training? It's students have decision-making power over the student fee-funded buildings through the governance and advisory boards. You can determine policies. In some cases, you can determine use of the buildings. Students have input on budgets. You can set funding priorities. The Event Center Governance Board has set funding priorities over a series of years. They've been able to make major improvements to the Event Center, the roof, the air handling systems. They've been able to renovate bathrooms, paint, redoing the floor. The floor was redone in, I believe, 2017, and it was the first time since '79 that the floor had been replaced. That's a long time for a floor not to have been redone. So this information also helps you understand why some facilities are struggling to address maintenance issues. And you may have a greater understanding of why students are often asked to provide that additional funding for buildings. The university is currently dealing with a substantial budget deficit because of the pandemic, and building and maintenance operations expenses are part of the overall budget for the university, and they're also part of the budgets for all of those buildings. And then my last one really is just opening up for questions. Do you have questions about the campus and campus buildings? Monica.
Yes, hi. I did have a question. Considering, I know you talked a lot about like fees and where like student fees usually go. I guess my question is, considering that we're right now like during COVID, and since a lot of students are currently maybe home or away from campus, are there any fees in particular that you can mention that might be beneficial to no longer charge students due to no longer being campus? And yeah.
So in terms of, I'm mostly talking really about the building support fees and things like that. And the buildings still need support. And there are still things going on in most of the buildings, even though the students aren't here. My understanding is that that's a policy decision that was made by the University of California level and not on a campus-wide level. Could be wrong with that, but that was my understanding. But most of the buildings are continuing to try to do work and to maintain some of its infrastructure. Like I said, the University Center has been doing some pipe replacement while students have gone. It's a difficult thing to do when students are on campus. So in some ways, it's given them an opportunity to go through and make some repairs that would be difficult for them to do otherwise. But there are also there's ongoing custodial stuff. They're trying to repair the elevator that goes up to the third floor where the food bank, the extra food bank area is. So there are a lot of things that are still going on with those fees. So okay. I would not have that answer for you. Alina, did you have that answer?
Yeah, I have maybe a comment, and then there's also a question in the chat. Okay. Maybe you could just speak to the process for getting a fee. Like students have to vote on all fees.
Yes. So yes, of course, the student fee referendums are voted on during the AS. Usually, it's during AS elections, but it could also be part of the campus referenda process. And there's a threshold that you have to meet. Usually, that's 20%. It's 20% of the students have to vote, and then they have to meet a certain threshold of people voting yes in order for those fees to pass. Which is why it's been difficult sometimes for buildings to get maintenance support from students. It's not that I don't, I also think that you should ask the campus to step up and do that maintenance, but I'm just really trying to explain why sometimes they go to you to ask for that maintenance. It's because students build the buildings, and so then in the campus mind, sometimes they say, that's your building, you wanted it, you built it, you should maintain it and renovate it if you want to, or do whatever it is that you want. I do still believe you need to ask the campus to participate in that, because most of those buildings also serve the campus in various ways. So, and in the chat it said, could the monies raised from student tuition be used to finance maintenance of student fee facilities? No, my understanding is no, that the tuition money is used for other purposes and not for maintenance of buildings. Usually that money comes from the state, through the state budgeting process. It's going to be an interesting time over the next couple of years, because the state budget, because of the pandemic, has also been cut, and the university isn't getting revenue that they would normally get from housing or other auxiliary services. And budgets will be very tight, and you may be a part of helping to make decisions on how budget money is being spent or where things are being cut. So trying to have this as some of your background while you're getting that information and trying to make decisions or provide student input on decisions is important. Endowment money, private donations, definitely private donations can be used. I know the University Center was looking at trying to get some private donations before the pandemic hit. They were working with development to try to see if there was a donor that might be able to step up to help the University Center, and so that students wouldn't have to pay. They wouldn't have to ask students for all of the money to renovate the University Center. Do you have other questions, or no? So the other thing that I did want to mention is that it's particular to the University Center, but it's also part of other buildings' budgets, is that buildings get, auxiliary services get recharged. Many departments get recharged, but auxiliary services in particular get a lot of recharges. And the University Center's recharges add up to over $2 million a year from their budget that just go to recharges. And some of those recharges return back to the Office of the President. They go to Vice Chancellor's offices. They go to other places. And if the University Center wasn't paying those recharges, they wouldn't be in the same financial situation that they currently are. And the governance board at the University Center has worked to challenge some of those recharges and get some of the recharges reduced. But that plays a part in an overall budget and on sometimes on a building's ability to make renovations and to do ongoing maintenance to keep their building up. So that's just another piece of that whole budgeting puzzle that you need to keep in mind, the recharges that happen. Student fee facilities are the University Center, the Event Center, the Recreation Center, Student Resource Building. I think that's it. Am I missing anything, Alina?
I'm not sure, but that sounds
Yeah, I think those are the student fee facilities.
5?
Yeah. Yes.
Close. Anybody else have any questions, comments, concerns? Marilyn, maybe if you could speak to, I'm curious, would you say there's enough student representation on the shared governance committees? Like, are there students who have filled all those seats?
I think there are still openings on some of the seats, but all of those committees are student majority committees too. Those student advisory, they all are student majority, and I believe all of them require a student chair. So I know the University Center, both the University Center and Event Center, I sit on as an advisor, but not as a voting member. And those both require the chair to either be an undergraduate or a graduate student. So that's definitely a positive. The event center often is missing an AS rep. The program board gets a rep on there, but there's also an AS rep. And so if you're interested in being on the event center governance board, look into being the Associated Students rep. The University Center, I'm not sure where the university stands right now. The University Center Governance Board has a lot of student representation. They have a multicultural center person, an Office of Student Life or student club representative. They have a couple graduate students. They have 4 or 5 AS reps. So there's a lot of students on the University Center Governance Board, and they are often looking for somebody to fill an opening. The University Center likes to have people sit on for at least 2 years so that they can get a better perspective of the University Center and carry over that knowledge into the next year, so they're not all new people every year. And when I first came, the University Center Governance Board was a very powerful board and a very popular board to be on, because you got to have say in the policies at the University Center, including things like how long they were open, what hours they were, access to the building after hours and stuff like that. It was really a competitive process to get on that board. And in recent years, it hasn't been as popular, and I'm not really sure why, because it's a pretty big building and there's a lot going on in that building. They have subcommittees that talk about the dining services in there and the bookstore prices and dining services prices and how space is allocated. And there's a lot of important decisions that are made on that board. So I would definitely recommend being on one of the governance boards and looking into how those buildings are operated and managed by the student advisory boards and how the money is being spent. I think at the Event Center Governance Board in particular, how they set priorities for how that money is spent. They've been very strategic about saving money until they get enough and then doing big projects like replacing the air handling, which is hundreds of thousands of dollars. But it makes such a difference in that building to have the air handling work and to have fresh air coming into the building. So they've been very strategic about setting priorities and then tackling those big projects one at a time, and over time making some very big changes in improving that building. So they've done a great job. And now they're looking at more renovations on things like bathrooms and flooring and stuff like that. It may not seem exciting to you, but it really helps so much. And there's so many students that use those buildings. University Center, so many students use the University Center, Event Center, and having students really caring enough to be like, what's going to make this better for the students, and helping to set those priorities is super important.
There's another question from Yuan in the chat. Why did some buildings built before 2000 not have operational support included in the ballot?
Sometimes it was because they had other streams of income that they thought would cover it. They weren't imagining that it wouldn't ever cover their operational support, like the bookstore funding. It just wasn't in. It's hard to imagine, but in the 90s, like, we barely had internet, and nobody had laptops. So it wasn't really in people's minds that the world was going to change that much with computers, with the internet, with things going online, with Amazon. Didn't exist. And so everybody bought all of their stuff at the bookstore. And so it just wasn't part of what people were thinking, that the retail model was going to change so drastically that they would not be providing that stream of income in the ways that they used to. And don't get me wrong, the bookstore still provides income. They still make income that helps to support the University Center, but it is not at all what it used to be in terms of actual dollars. And so, and also the margins are very small now. They try not to, especially textbooks, they try not to raise textbook prices. So that margin is actually very small. The bigger margin is on things like sweatshirts, merchandise. And then we used to make a lot of money on computer sales, and we really do not anymore. Nobody really buys, well, some people buy their computers at the bookstore, but it's not like it used to be where you could sell thousands of computers every year at the bookstore, because that's where people were buying their computer, and many people were buying their first computer at the bookstore. But now you have your first computer when you're like in 5th grade or before. So you're buying your computers other places, and it's not that stream of income anymore. And then otherwise, I think maybe just new buildings don't really need that much operational support. And maybe it was just some short-sightedness about the fact that the buildings would eventually get old and there would need to be more money put into them. to keep them up. And then donor-funded buildings, I think that's a touchy situation for donor-funded buildings because they're giving you money to build the building and then to ask them to fund an endowment for the ongoing maintenance. I think that was probably a touchy situation, and the university just maybe thought they would figure it out later. I don't know. I'm personally speculating on that. Any other questions in chat? No? It's a short discussion, but it's important for you all to think about how the university is funded and how some of these buildings are funded, and then also the power that students have to impact how that funding is used, which is pretty substantial.
Yeah, I was in the session where Marisela was discussing shared governance. So for those of you who were in that session, this I think ties in, and she shared on how to find those open positions, which is we can update. I'll double check and make sure that those are updated. But how to apply for some of those positions through AS is in that link I just shared through COC.
Yeah.
Oh, and then you have another question.
And I believe there's also descriptions at the end of the legal code about all of the different boards and committees, the positions that you can serve on campus. So you can also, all of those meetings are also open to the public. So you can ask somebody that's on the board. Most of them aren't meeting right now. University Center and Event Center won't start meeting again until the fall quarter, and they'll be on Zoom. But you can attend those. They're open to the public for people to attend and watch and listen to what's going on.
Marilyn is on a lot of committees on campus. And so maybe, I don't know if it's Slack or email, maybe, how would people contact you?
Either one, Slack or email is fine. Feel free to contact me. Like I said, those won't start meeting until the fall, probably, well, mid-October-ish. So let me know if you're interested and I can let you know when the meetings are.